Hello sir, this is my topic, floods in the Philippines. The Philippines. Being a country in the middle of the equator, the Philippines is no stranger to typhoons and storm surges. When one does happen, the effects are many, from landslides in mountain regions to floods in remote areas. Today we are going to be talking about floods in the Philippines. First off, let's talk about floods in general. What are floods? Floods are a natural phenomenon in which a piece of land gets submerged underwater. Due to water's natural behavior, lower ground areas are more likely to experience flooding. These are some of the causes of flooding in the Philippines. Heavy rain in low-level areas without proper drainage can flood. An example would be Espana Boulevard of Sampaloc, Manila. It's easily flooded when it rains because of the poor drainage and the overflowing amount of garbage stuck in them. In November 2019, MMDA dubbed Espana Boulevard as the most flood-prone road of Metro Manila.
Tuwing tag-ulan, isa sa mga problema sa Metro Manila ang pagbaha. Ang pangunahing contributor daw dyan, basura. Ang Espana Boulevard daw ang pinakamadaling bahain na kalsada at ayon sa MMDA po yan. May report si Salima Refra.
Ang biro sa Maynila, umihilang ang pusa, babaha na. At base sa datos ng MMDA Flood Control Center, ang pinakamadaling bahain na kalsada sa kabisera ng bansa, walang iba kundi ang Espanya. Lumalabas sa 20 mm lang na ulan na bumuhos doon sa isang oras, aabot na agad sa 30 cm o halos isang talampakan ng baha. Naaabutin ng 45 minuto bago humupa. Kung magtuloy-tuloy ang malakas na ulan at umabot ang buhos sa 80 mm kada oras, aabot ng halos 3 talampakan ng baha. Bagay na hindi na madaraanan ng mga ordinaryong sasakyan. Aabutin din ng 3 oras bago ito humupa. Kaya nakapagtataka pa ba na minsan ang may nag-jet ski na sa gitna ng baha?
Overflowing rivers. When there is more water than usual in a river, the excess water flows downstream towards the low-lying areas of land near it, causing it to be submerged. An example of this would be the Cagayan River overflowing, burning entire villages underwater. Here's what it looks like. Breaking of dams. Dams have been created to hold massive amounts of water from the areas behind it, and it can then use this as power source to generate power. But what happens if a dam breaks? Well, it's obvious. The area behind it will get flooded in an instant. Thankfully, there have been no major dam breaks in the Philippines. The closest would be Magat Dam and Angat Dam. However, in other countries, dams have been known to break. One of them is in the Sardoga Reservoir in Uzbekistan. Here's what happened.
This body of water that you see on Google Maps was a reservoir for irrigating a desert landscape. It held some 900 million tons of water. Unfortunately, during the construction of the dam, the building company decided to save money and spent only half as much on materials as was needed. On May 1st, 2020, due to unusually strong winds, a powerful wave rose up which first destroyed the lower part and subsequently the entire dam. Now you're looking at NASA imagery. This is before and here is after. The water traveled a distance of 60 kilometers and even gathered along the border with the neighboring country of Kazakhstan, an area of 610 square kilometers. That's nearly the size of the entire state of Texas.
There are more ways a flood could occur, but these are the 3 main ones the Philippines is going to have to worry about. There have been many floods that happen in the Philippines throughout the years. Everyone knows that floods are an extreme threat in our country. Some areas know it better than most. The effects of floods range from many. A really big flood can result in millions, even billions of pesos of damages to roads and bridges, buildings and other economic infrastructure, and the loss of agricultural crops and livestock, loss of productivity, industry, commerce and trade. To this is added the incalculable loss of human lives directly attributable to the floods, as well as the hardship and attendant socio-economic problems of forced human displacement and the emotional impact on those affected by floods. Floods in rural areas have it worse. Even though these areas have lesser people and lesser infrastructures, they can't recover quickly like those in urban areas. Floods in these areas will permanently affect the lives of the people who live there. Here's an example.
Farmers rushed to save their crops as floodwaters started to submerge this part of a cornfield in Baggao, Cagayan. But they only recovered 20 bags of corn from the expected harvest of 450 kavan. Several bags of corn washed away by the strong river current in San Miguel village. Some bridges and roads in Baggao are impassable as the river overflowed. A high tide also worsened the flood in Nagtupacan village in the town of Pamplona. Several houses were submerged. Residents affected by the flooding were evacuated.
And some farmers have it worse than that. So the Philippines, a country in the middle of the equator, a country that has been hit by many typhoons over the years. What is its plan to mitigate flood damage? I will be talking about two approaches to flood management in the Philippines. First is the Silang Santa Rosa watershed. This approach was made by a team of hydrologic modeling specialists led by Professor Demasa Macandong of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, along with Isao Endo of Japan's Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Experts of the two institutions worked together in the Philippines and in Japan. They worked on a flood hazard map where they understood not only the current risk but also the future risk of flooding. They worked with the government officials of Santa Rosa Silang watershed, which in addition to Santa Rosa and Silang, included Cubao and Binyan. They asked the government officials to draw out maps in which they plan to use the land in the future and how development affects the use of land. With that information, the team was able to simulate the conditions of the watershed in 2035, in which they were able to predict that massive floods would swamp the towns when typhoons hit the future. The team was able to show the flood hazard maps to the local government and make them aware of the problems posed by climate change. This way, the government has a better understanding of what to do in case a flood happens. They would know how to separate their lands, which they use for residential and etc. They would figure out how to keep the flood drains open and unclogged. This hazard map paved the way for the 4 local governments unit to team up and create the Integrated Watershed Management Council for the Silang Santa Rosa watershed, an important formal space for collaboration where development and land use plans could be discussed and harmonized to allow these governments to plan their flood management accordingly. Some countermeasures that the city of Santa Rosa has done was to deploy environmental armies to clean the trash from rivers and remove vegetation that could obstruct the flow of the river. The Silang Santa Rosa watershed is a model case that can be adapted by more developed, resilient and climate-sensitive towns or cities to mitigate and manage flooding with strengths. It's an existing and proven model case that shows how urbanization can severely affect the cities, and even though it is impossible to stop altogether, these key countermeasures can be planned carefully and correctly with the help of the Silang Santa Rosa watershed. The second approach is from the Metro Manila Flood Management Master Plan. This 25-year plan supports solutions including river and urban drainage area improvements, floodways, flood management dams, land use regulations, watershed conservation, reforestation, flood warning systems, rainfall and water level gauging stations. The Metro Manila Flood Management Master Plan works to improve the city's drainage, clean up spillways, and protect the lives and livelihood of 1.7 million people. That's it for my topic. Thank you for watching, sir, and Happy New Year.